expenses, like mileage and lunch and stuff. So any questions about that? All right, good. So we'll have those forms this afternoon and you can just complete them then. Okay, so we put on the agenda we would do a little review of the last meeting about whether there were questions that came up, concerns that we didn't address, that what were your thoughts about it when you went home and said, wow, what did I get myself into? Or you said, this is going to be really hard or boring or easy or contentious, or what did you, any thoughts about the last meeting?
I just had one thought of another person that we might want to get scheduled to talk to us. Somebody who's really familiar with the state's demographics to come and speak directly with us.
The whole state's demographics as opposed to the people that are part of the retirement?
A combination of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we do have, we will have the treasurer and the HR will be with us to talk about the state employees demographics. And I'm not sure who would talk about the demographics of the VSEA. Who?
You mean the NEA?
That's what I meant. I meant NEA, yeah. These EAs are a little too much for me. Jeff, who would that be?
Sorry, I wasn't sure the email.
If you were in my committee, you would be kicked out right now. But who would talk about the demographics of the teachers' population?
Or the teacher population.
Yeah, we can get somebody to
HR
talk about
department
that.
that we can look for state data, but we don't have.
Let me think on.
Okay.
Who might that be, but Jeff Fannin, for the record, Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA. I think Andrew's question was about the demographics as a whole of the state.
Yeah.
But you just specifically want.
Well, we want all three. I think we want demographics of the whole state. And then we want broken down the demographics of the state employees and of the teacher population, because we're going to be addressing all of it.
Okay.
So,
I will give it some thought and let you know.
okay. And
One
yeah,
caution, Madam Chair, is maybe something from VHI, the Vermont Education Health Initiative, that might have age-related demographic data.
Oh, you're just looking for age-related data? Yeah, I mean, the treasurer's office probably has that as well, right?
It's included in the evaluation reports.
Yeah.
oh, okay, great. Okay,
Both systems.
for both systems. So that what we really need now is somebody just to talk about the demographics of
And I can do that.
the state itself. And we know those demographics are going to change and have a huge impact on our House colleagues in January, because the actual demographics might not have changed too much, but where they are living now has changed. So, okay, we'll do that. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think we all have our collective work cut out for us during the course of this task force. I think I don't know if that necessarily changed during the first meeting, but I was just encouraged by everyone's approach and very hopeful for our discussions here. Looking back on the first meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really hoping that we can think of ourselves as 13 people who are here to address this issue with our constituencies in mind, but knowing that 13 people have to come up with some real suggestions. So, good. Good to hear. Thank you.
If I could, I guess if I could echo that, just thinking about, yesterday I was in a meeting with, fellow workers, and of course, that's the first topic that comes up is, oh, you're on the committee. And so for me, I think it was just the quote unquote, the enormity or the responsibility that, just us as a small group have. And then I was just thinking back to the other day, what Leona was saying, so eloquently about how this issue affects so many of the workers that we all see every day, passing AOT people today or things like that. But it doesn't just affect us, it doesn't affect them, it also affects their families, the economy, future employees that haven't even been hired yet. So I just looked at it, I guess, as a group, we're representing troopers and teachers and state employees, all the way from, custodians to commissioners. And there's such a wide range of people and a wide range of things that they do that does it make sense to at some point have the opportunity to hear from them and how these decisions will affect, we know it's going to affect everyone personally, but how does it affect the ability to bring people in? How does it affect the ability to recruit people? Because we all have jobs that are important to the state, to the vitality of the state. And if something damages that, what does the state look like in 5, 10, 15 years if we can't fill the holes that are there? So just to me, I was just thinking it's important to have opportunities to hear from them, whether it be in testimony or some other way. Just how are these decisions going to affect, that ability to bring people in and assist in keeping all of the services that we provide moving forward. And going forward.
Well, I think that there are some opportunities written into the legislation itself. There is a requirement for at least one public hearing. And I've been thinking about that, and I don't know how other people think about it, but to me, for a public hearing, it makes more sense probably to do it after we have an initial report that's due in October, and that would give people then the chance to react to something. But even before that, I think that if people, I don't know about having a public hearing before, I don't know. But I think that some of that responsibility lies with their representatives here so that we hear from you how it's going to affect your constituents, because clearly you're talking to your constituents. And I don't know if that makes any sense or not, or if that's, and we could have some kind of a public meeting. I mean, they're all public and people
Sure.
can come. And if people think they have something to tell us, they can always get on an agenda. We are open. But whether having a huge public hearing before we have something for people to react to, I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, and I just personally, I think, in my mind, I was thinking, that would make like October, we have something. It might be preliminary, but it's just a chance for us as a group to kind of get a gauge on the temperature of what people are really, because not everyone's going to say something to me or to other members, or they might not have the opportunity. I think it's certainly a good opportunity to get a gauge from what other people are thinking.
That makes sense to have a, Peter? Oh, that was a thumbs up.
The Zoom agreement.
Can I just piggyback on that? When I think about what you were saying about how these meetings are all public and that people could get on the agenda and whatever, I think what I'm seeing in my own school district right now is that we're reacting to some non-transparency from the superintendent. And so our board meetings, which are also public, are getting flooded with like 140 people at a board meeting. And so I think if we plan ahead for these public forums or panel discussion or whatever it is, and people know that it's coming, they might be less apt to flood this sort of public forum.
Yep, thanks.
I was thinking along the same lines. I was thinking that there's proaction and reaction. And I guess I would ask the question, which do we want? Do we want to invite voices in to the decision-making process before we get to the point of the initial report? Or do we want to invite those voices in as a reaction to our report? And I did hear you say, Jeanette, that, our role here with our constituents is to bring those positions and voices. But I wonder if we might want something prior to that first report, just to invite those voices in a way that tells the stories so that we're sure we're responding to the lives of people.
Yeah.
Well, having done public hearings during the legislative session, I can say that it was troubling to understand the extent to which people who came from either the state workforce or the teacher workforce really didn't understand the problem and its origins and what was actually contributing to the crisis point that we're in. And so I think one of the major goals that I have with respect to this task force and this process is that people come together around the same set of facts. This is not a case of the legislature stealing pension money. This is not a case of the legislature making poor investment decisions. That's not the legislature's decision to make. And yet we were hearing a lot of the "you stole our money, you need to make it right" sorts of things in this public hearing. And I don't think that that's a good use of our time as a task force to be responding to people who have incorrect information. So I would hope that we can figure out how to make sure that people have the accurate information, that they're understanding the facts that are being presented here as we understand them, and that we can be using that input productively to inform the decision making that we have to make. I mean, one of the takeaways at the public hearings was, I'm 3 years from retirement, or I'm 5 years from retirement, and I already have my plans made, and I thought I knew where I was going to live and what my income was going to be, and that was really helpful for us to understand the importance and to place that value on anything that we were going to try to do, because once people are close to retirement, they're sort of locked in and they don't have the flexibility that maybe somebody who's in their 30s has in terms of planning and saving. So, it's not to say that that there isn't any value in doing an earlier public hearing, but it has to be a public hearing that's sort of where you feel like people are on the same page and understand the challenge that we have in front of us.
I think one of my thoughts on an early hearing would not necessarily be about how possible pension changes impact people, but for us to kind of get connected with the people that are impacted, just to kind of hear about the work and the value that they bring to our communities and to our state. It is kind of a good grounding reminder to us that it's easy to look at numbers on paper, but it's important to think that there are faces and people and stories that impact all of our daily lives. So getting people to speak kind of just as a reminder of what they bring to our great state here.
Yeah. Did you, Mike?
Yeah, just one thought on that, and maybe, to echo Molly and Andrew's point, but also Representative Coppola-Hansa's point. Maybe there's opportunity to have educational sessions that have a public hearing component, and maybe there's even opportunity to do that outside of Montpelier to some degree. That might be helpful in this process. So maybe something for us to consider, maybe even something for a sub-task force or whatever the title was for, of the subcommittee.
Interesting. Yeah.
And yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking back to a comment that I think Molly made at the first meeting about a desire to, make sure our work here was values based and, go, as Andrew said, looking beyond simply the numbers and, thinking about really the impacts on folks that maybe a traditional public hearing where folks are reacting to a specific proposal is different than kind of what I'm envisioning in terms of we could hear from people about their work and the importance of these benefits to their state employment and recruitment and retainment. And that can help guide our work here a bit. So maybe it's a bit of a different a format than a public hearing, but it would be good to bring some of those voices into our work as we set out here, I think.
Yeah, I will tell you, I have mixed feelings about public hearings because the way the traditional public hearing happens is that everybody's given their 2 minutes or their 3 minutes. You don't interact with them. You don't have any discussion. People say their 2 minutes and then they go away and the next person says their 2 minutes. And I know this is going out to everybody, but my feeling is that they are not terribly productive because there isn't chance for discussion or response to people. And I wonder if perhaps this group, if we might consider meeting in a couple places in the state that people can come to the meeting so that they can hear some of the same information that we all are hearing. Because as Sarah said, if you have people talking to us that have a very different understanding of what the issue is and why we're here and why we need to do something, that isn't terribly helpful. So we might consider doing 2 of our meetings in the north and the south or something like that. I don't know. But then people could attend. Molly.
I just had another thought also that, how we put out questions for research about numbers. Maybe at times there will be questions that come up that we could go back or we could have a process to gather information about how people feel like that would affect their jobs or their stories or their choices about where they work. There might be sort of it's like the economics and the social science, maybe there's a social science equivalent to the economics questions that we're asking.
Yeah, I would hope that actually people who the 3 of you are here representing the teachers community and the 2 of you are here representing the state employees and you representing the troopers. And I would hope that you would be communicating also with your constituencies out there, however that happens. I don't know how that would happen, if you yourself would do it or if you would do it through VSEA and NEA and BTA. But I think that has the possibility for bringing in a lot of constituent information that, and granted, everybody won't talk to you, but we each represent about 40,000 people and everybody doesn't talk to us. Oh, no, you don't represent 40,000, but and everybody doesn't talk to us either. So anyway, I don't know. So we can think about how to do some of those. Anything else that came up last week that you think we should?
Other questions, things you pondered on the way home that?
Oh, do we have the list of the upcoming meetings?
We do not have that list yet.
Maybe we can sit down with the doodle poll during the day today.
Yeah, we'll look at them.
Yeah.
We are, John did a great counting. He counted the weeks and then he counted the numbers of meetings and he came up with the idea that we could miss four weeks of meetings. I mean, clearly not in a row, but, and still meet our target date.
Because our final report's due on December 2nd. So we probably want to meet right before that to review a draft of that report. And so given that, there are a couple of weeks we're going to miss. And I think we should just say that we're not going to meet next week because Sarah and I have to be in Salt Lake City for a redistricting conference. Another task that we have to do next legislative session. Yeah, just a little. But beyond that, we haven't made any plans with respect to the schedule. But we do have the doodle poll.
So what we can do is look at where people couldn't be there and say maybe those are the meetings that we miss, or I mean, the weeks that we miss, not the meetings that we miss, the weeks that we miss. And also it gives, meeting every week is a lot of work for the people who are working on helping us get the next meeting.
Right.
And the
Right.
information and all that. So there was some real scrambling between Friday and today by people, and it being a holiday weekend and everything. It was hard. So,
I would say that was the thing I was most impressed by was the agenda when it came out, that you were able to put it together based on our meeting when we left Friday afternoon.
we're wizards. Yeah.
To piggyback on the scheduling conversation, I would like to see us doodle poll out the rest of our time together. I know that for us, we need to be able to plan for substitutes in our school way out in advance. So the sooner we can plan the rest of the meetings, another doodle poll or however we're going to do it for the September to early December, that would be.
Would folks like that to be the same Wednesday, Thursday? Does that make sense going forward? That we would?
I just need to schedule because I had to reschedule 10 appointments today. And that was yesterday I did all of that because because we didn't know. So I was like, I don't know if it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday. And so,
Well, I think next week you're going to be off. So, and my hope would be that we can sit down with the doodle poll and just establish at least for what the next 6 to 8 weeks after that look like.
That'd be awesome.
And then send out
and then
another
we
one
should-
for the rest of the time. Yeah.
We should get the rest of them
Yeah.
set right now.
We'll have to think about snow at the end. Might want a 4 plan in case there's a cancellation in there. Hard to imagine right now.
What happens?
So anything else that from the last session or that you thought of that you'd like to? Okay, well, let's jump right into our OPEB. Does everybody know what OPEB stands for? No? Right.
And Chris, while you're coming up, I noticed that you have the agenda. You have the agenda from here until lunchtime.
I will not take that long.
Okay. That's good, because I was going to suggest if you had that much information to give us, that we pre-plan a bio break for everyone to be able to get up and stretch their legs.
I can assure you all that we will not take that long on this presentation.
Excellent, even with questions. Super.
All right.
Now you can turn your thing over, Leona.
Okay, now open up your blue packet.
Well, good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Chris Roop. I'm a fiscal analyst with the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. Today, the co-chairs have asked me to provide you all with sort of a high-level overview of OPEB, because OPEB is one of the topics of the retirement benefit package that the state offers state employees and teachers that are within the scope of Act 75 for this group to think of ways to come up with a funding plan to fund. So it would be really helpful in order to start that process to make sure we all understand what OPEB is and how it works. Now, I am not equipped to get deep in the weeds of healthcare policy. You're going to want to hear from people who are much closer to the work than I am. But my goal here today is to provide you all with a high-level overview of what it is, how it works, and what the fiscal impacts are, and why it's something that is worth paying attention to.
And if I can just add that the human resources and the treasurer's office are probably the people who will get us into the weeds. Human Resources is this being a terrible week for a lot of people. A lot of people are on vacation and not available to get into the weeds, but Michael might be able to help us out on some of that, but we will have another Into the Weeds day.
The next slide. All right, so what's OPEB? OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, basically meaning retirement benefits other than pensions. Typically, the word OPEB is referring to subsidized retiree health care and health benefits. So here in Vermont, we do provide most of the money goes toward subsidized retiree health care, but we do also offer prescription plans for retirees. Dental coverage is offered to retirees and eligible dependents, but at the full premium cost to the member. And some members in VSERS particularly can continue their life insurance policy into retirement. There are some links here when you have the electronic copy that take you to some pages that have some more specific information about the plans. But whenever you hear OPEB, it's not a scary technical term. We're really talking about subsidized retiree health benefits. Next slide. So why is this something you need to pay attention to? OPEB is one of the areas, along with pensions, that are a pretty significant area of long-term liabilities on the state's balance sheet. You'll often hear us talk about the four buckets, or the big four liabilities. Those would be the two pension systems and the two OPEB systems. So, if you remember on Friday, we talked a lot about the first two buckets on the pension. Today, we'll talk a little bit more about OPEB. So the liabilities across all four buckets collectively total almost $10 billion. Thanks to pre-funding, primarily on the pension side, over $4 billion of assets are already set aside to pre-fund, but it's mostly on the pension side. We don't really pre-fund OPEB benefits. They are just minimally pre-funded. Instead, what we do is we pay these costs on what you'll hear as a pay-as-you-go basis or a pay-go basis, which means that the premiums to provide healthcare to today's retirees are paid for out of the budget on an ongoing basis. So that is a little bit different than pensions, because when you pre-fund, you've got a pool of assets that's grown over time through investment returns, and you're peeling some money off of that every year in order to pay those benefits. Here, we don't have a large pool of pre-funded assets. So the actual cost of providing the healthcare to today's retirees is paid out of the budget year after year. The shortfall to pay for all of these four buckets total $5.6 billion. So that's about $9,100 for every Vermonter. And these are all based on end of FY20 data. But it's a pretty substantial liability. And we really don't have a whole lot of money set aside to pre-fund. Next slide. So just a little bit of background of how these programs work. State employees are entitled to continue their healthcare coverage into retirement. So the way that works is, depending on your years of service and what types of plan you're in, will determine your subsidy rate going forward, how much you have to pay to continue the benefit. Typically, when you're an active state employee, there's an 80-20 split. So the state picks up 80% of the cost and the member picks up 20%. The teacher, and there's a trust fund set up. There's two trust funds, one for the teachers and one for the state employees. And they're set up to receive assets and contributions. And, they're lock boxes, if you will. Like, that money has to be used to pay for benefits. The teacher side also does, a similar structure where they provide benefits with the subsidy, but it works a little bit differently. The teacher side works through VHI, the Vermont Education Health Initiative, and they manage the benefit structure. So it's not the same as the state, where you're just continuing your coverage that you had when you were an active employee. And just like with the state employees, there's a trust fund that exists is set up to exist to receive contributions, invest proceeds, and then make out those payments. It's important to know that OPEB is not the same as pensions. They are very different creatures. The rules are different around them, and OPEB benefits typically tend to have fewer legal restrictions on the ability to make changes in the future. They typically do not have the same vested contract rights that pension benefits have. Next slide.
Hey, Chris, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
On the pay-as-you-go basis, is that common with OPEB across the country?
That's a great question. Yes, it is. So many states have very minimal pre-funding of OPEB. And the reason why is the GASB rules, the Government Accounting Standards Board. They're the ones that come up with all the rules that government agencies need to follow when doing their accounting and their financial reports. Until recently, did not require a whole lot of reporting on OPEB. In the last 5 to 10 years, the reporting requirements have tightened up, and states and cities are having to be much more forthright about what these liabilities truly cost. So they're no longer a footnote on a financial statement. Because of that extra scrutiny and because of the monetary environment being what it is, which we'll get into, these liabilities have grown on balance sheets, and there's been a lot more attention being paid to pre-funding. So, if you go back decades, OPEB was not pre-funded systematically across the nation the way pensions are, but more and more states are moving in that direction.
And there was no substantive reason for that. It wasn't highlighted because of the accounting standards were different.
I think that's a really good question. I think the accounting standards changing have forced people to pay more attention to the issue. And because other people are paying more attention to the issue. And when the financial analysts and the bond rating agencies are paying more attention to these issues, everybody else tends to follow along as well.
Yeah, fair.
Chris, so you've talked, I just want to know what OPEB covers in healthcare as it pertains to prior to age 65, at age 65 with Medicare coming in A and B, and then post age 65 going forward. You've talked about the pre-age 65, the employees who retire at, the call it rule of 87 or rule of 90, that retire, they continue to purchase their health care in accordance with statute until they reach Medicare age. What happens at Medicare age at age 65?
So at Medicare age, that's a great question. And the treasurer and HR would be more equipped to get into the specifics, but at a high level, these plans interact with Medicare. So whenever you retire before you're eligible for Medicare, you are in a different plan structure than once you are eligible for Medicare, because the plans typically enroll you in Medicare once you're eligible. There is a very good reason for that, because once you are eligible for Medicare, the cost of insuring you goes way down. So one very important dynamic around the whole OPEB conversation is what happens with federal healthcare policy and Medicare eligibility, and what happens on the on the pension side. Because if you have fewer people retiring before they're eligible for Medicare, your OPEB costs will go down. If you have a pension system that encourages people to maybe work a little bit longer or work a little bit closer to Medicare eligibility, that will generally result in savings on the OPEB side.
So then the Medicare eligibility, obviously they're automatically enrolled in A, which everyone is entitled to. You've been paying it all along under FICA. Part B, is that a requirement that everyone pays for Part B?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
I talked to Commissioner Fastigi yesterday, and most of their people are, as I said, are on holidays this week, but they will bring in the exact plans that we have, so that we can see what the plans are for teachers, what they are for state employees. And there's just 2 plans for state employees, but they'll bring all those in.
Okay, good.
So that we can see that detail.
I'll wait and ask her, and I've got the questions here, so thank you.
And we'll also, I'll make sure Gail has the GASB 74 reports for OPEB for everybody to access. They're on the treasurer's website. They're a great resource, but they have a page in there that shows you what the premium rates are for all the different group plans, based on, whether you are eligible for Medicare, whether you're not, whether you have dependents or not. So you can have a feel for how those premium costs compare. So the way these systems work at sort of a high level is As I mentioned, they interact with Medicare, so they provide the OPEB benefits provide some wraparound coverage for services that Medicare does not cover. But Medicare really does help subsidize a lot of these sort of ongoing costs of providing basic health insurance to retirees. There's also employee group waiver plans in place for prescriptions, and that's resulted in some savings and some cost offsetting opportunities to lower the cost to the taxpayers. But generally, the way these rates are structured, with respect to VSERS Group F, which is the vast majority of the state workforce, and the teacher plan, is that there's a tiered system in place where the amount of subsidy you owe for your OPEB benefits are based on your longevity. So these are the current tiers. You could see that once you're in, if you have fewer than 10 years of service in the VSERS plan, the retiree has to pay the full cost. If you go up to 20 years, though, you can maintain that 80% coverage. There are some plans like the Group C, which is law enforcement, Group D, which is judges, and ODEF have just the straight 80% subsidy. But the vast majority of the state workforce is in what I refer to as New Group F. On the teacher side, it's very similar with the tiers. One important thing you'll notice here is you need 25 years of service in order to extend that subsidized coverage to spouses, which is a difference from the state plan. Next slide. So as I mentioned, these OPEB costs are funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. And here are the numbers from the FY22 Governor's Recommend budget. You can see that just like with the VSERS pension, the costs are associated or are attributed to the funds that pay the active employee salary. So a fringe benefit rate is assessed to the different cost centers of government. That fringe benefit rate includes the retirement expenses and the OPEB expenses. So since the general fund funds roughly 40% of the payroll, roughly 40% of these costs fall on the general fund. And the remainder of the costs just fall in proportion to how different funds of government pay for the payroll. You can see that right now we're paying about $37.2 million on the state OPEB benefit, and the general fund absorbs 40%, so roughly 14.9 million of it. The other funds pay the majority. The VSTRS side, the teacher side, the OPEB costs are primarily funded by the general fund. There are a few exceptions here, though. The employer group waiver plan subsidies do knock some cost off of that. There's also something called the new teacher healthcare employer charge. That was implemented a few years ago where schools that employ teachers who were hired after July 2015 pay a fixed annual rate that escalates every year with inflation into the fund to help offset some costs and to help start building up a pool of assets. So you can see right now that charge brings in $4.1 million. Through workforce attrition, as people retire, as more people are brought in, that number will keep going up. Right now, it's bringing in $4.1 million. So the total cost for the teacher side, we're looking at just shy of $43 million for that OPEB. The general fund share is reflected just at the bottom there that shows you what things have been in the last 4 years. The costs have been relatively stable on the state employee side. They've also been relatively stable on the teacher side. The treasurer's office and HR have done a lot of pretty innovative things in recent years to try to contain costs, to try to be efficient with things like the employer group waiver plan, the Medicare wraparounds to try to contain costs. So this has not been an area of growth impacting the budget to the degree that pensions have been in the last few years. But the liabilities have grown on the balance sheet for other reasons, which I'll get into in another slide.
Chris, is another way to think about that, the growth in liabilities is that it hasn't really been a result of surprises in terms of the demographics or costs, but it's more of an artifact of how we fund it.
Yes.
In terms of pay as you go.
That's a great preview. Yes. So all of our OPEB liabilities, we have to report on them similar to the way we do with pensions. As I mentioned earlier, the GASB rules require states now to report these on their financial statements, where it used to be sort of a footnote. Now it's much more prominent, and you have to do GASB accounting reports, and it shows up and really impacts your balance sheet to a degree that, it probably didn't 10 plus years ago when people weren't paying as much attention to it. And since we're not pre-funding right now, the total aggregate OPEB liabilities don't quite impact the budget the way the pension liabilities do because we're not on a pre-funding ADAC schedule. But the actual cost of paying the premiums obviously does impact the budget. So if you have really wild, out of control healthcare costs or really, really unusually expensive claims history, that will drive up the budgetary impact. And that's all because we're paying those costs on a pay-as-you-go basis. But the size of those liabilities that sit on the balance sheet, even though when they grow, there's not necessarily a direct growth in the appropriation on the budget, it does impact the bond ratings and the borrowing costs. If your long-term liabilities grow too much and grow out of control and there's not a plan to address them, that does not bode well for your bond rating. And as we all know, if your bond rating is jeopardized, that can show up in your budget in other ways, like in the form of higher borrowing costs. So like with pensions, pay as you go is not an ideal way to operate. You really want to pre-fund to be more efficient. And that is a much more prudent course of action because that allows you to take advantage of systematic investment gains over time to help fund these benefits. So not every dollar is coming straight out of the taxpayers or out of the operating budget. It also allows you to have some predictability in the costs and allows you to build up a little bit of a cushion. So there's a lot of reasons why it's a good idea to pre-fund, and we'll go into them a little bit more in another slide. But right now, our plans are very minimally pre-funded, and we don't have a pre-funding policy codified into statute. So as of the end of FY20, the VSERS system was less than 4% funded. It had $57 million worth of assets. And on the teacher side, it was less than 1% funded. In the past, and I mentioned this last time we were together on Friday when we were going through the contributors to the unfunded liabilities on the pension side, the teacher OPEB costs used to be paid out of the corpus of the teacher pension fund. That had the effect of just having an actuarial loss or a contribution shortfall. Money was coming out of the pension fund to pay these costs, but weren't really accounted for going in. Fortunately, that practice ended in 2014. And that was a contributing factor to why the teacher pension system has a lower funded ratio than the state employee side. But we transitioned away from that, and now we're just paying the costs on a pay-as-you-go basis out of the general fund. Next slide. So as I mentioned, previous efforts around OPEB really have focused a lot on ways to reduce liabilities and costs, like changing the benefit structure for certain new employees hired after July 2008. That's where you saw that tiered premium structure where the more years of service you have, the greater the subsidy you have into retirement. So that was a relatively recent reform. The employee group waiver plans have also helped curb some costs related to prescription drug coverage. And, a practice of charging OPEB costs to federal grants that fund, teacher employees and other government employees has also been a reform. So that way, regardless of who the funding source is, everybody's sort of being treated consistently and the fringe benefits being assessed. The additional contributions coming from school employers related to those more newly hired teachers has also certainly helped. It's been great that the practice of pulling that money out of the teacher pension system has ended. A larger plan was developed years before my time to pre-fund OPEB by 2038, but that plan was not consistently adhered to. I think the Treasurer's Office would probably have some useful expertise to share about the evolution of that conversation and the different plans that have surfaced and how we got to where we are right now. And more recently, a statutory change was made to give the treasurer the ability to invest any pre-funded OPEB assets with VPIC instead of just being deposited in the trust investment account, which operates differently than VPIC. The objectives of the trust investment account are a little different. The investment strategy is different. I'm not sure if they've fully implemented that yet, but as part of a path toward pre-funding, the legislature did give them the ability to invest that money on behalf of the OPEB trust the way they do with the pensions. But despite all of these changes happening, the PAYGO model still continues. There's still not very very much, there's still not a lot of assets built up in the trust funds. And there's no statutory pre-funding policy in place right now. We're still just paying these bills as we go.
Chris, I have a question.
Sure.
How long had the practice of paying for the teacher OPEB out of Vister's pension system, how long was that in place?
That is a great question that I do not have the answer to, but we can get the answer to that.
Chris, can I ask you another question? Just, I guess, two questions. One, like, where did the money that's in the OPEB trust fund, where did that come from if we're pay as you go? And then you mentioned like with the pensions, like there's sometimes a liquidity crunch where assets have to be sold to pay. I presume since we're pay as you go, those monies that are sitting in those trust funds are just sitting there growing. There's no, you don't sell them and use that for OPEB liabilities at this point.
So let me start with the second piece. So I think the money in the trusts, I think those assets are built up and they're either in the trust investment account or in VPIC. I just don't know if they've done that yet. The treasurer's office could probably speak a little more to what's happening with those assets right now. There are statutory restrictions on what you can do with that money. So you can't use it to go, build a new fire station or anything. You have to use it to fund retiree healthcare. There was a loan arrangement set up several years back before my time that resulted in some of the money being put into the trusts. And there's a statutory provision in place now that a portion of the unrestricted general fund balance from year to year goes into the VSERS trust account. So that has not been in place for very long, but that is how some of the assets have gotten there that are there right now. And I think some of the balance is also likely attributed to the fact that, sometimes your claims history is a little less than what you thought it would be. So, you don't necessarily spend every single dollar you put in. Every once in a while into the fund. Yeah, you might run a little bit of a balance from year to year. So why is this important? Why should you care? Lacking a pre-funding strategy around OPEB in and of itself is directly responsible for $1.68 billion of that $9.8 billion of liabilities that are sitting on the state's balance sheet. The reason why is because when we are not pre-funding, we cannot discount our liabilities or do our actuarial math based on a 7% assumed rate of return, the way we can with the pensions. So with the pensions, you're investing money according to a statutory funding policy. That money is being invested at VPIC at 7%, and you can use a 7% rate of return and discount rate when doing all of your math. We're not doing that though. Since we are not pre-funding, we are on a pay-as-you-go basis. The accounting rules do not allow us to act as if we are pre-funding. So we do not have a big pool of assets right now that are being invested at 7%. Instead, we have to use the GASB rules proscribe a blended discount rate that is very heavily influenced by the 20-year AA municipal bond rate. So instead of being able to use a 7% assumed rate of return, we're using 2.2%. That may not sound like a lot, 2.2 and 7. It is a huge deal when you crunch these numbers and you discount things according to these different rates. So the fact that we are not pre-funding and can't use that 7% rate and instead have to use a 2.2% rate in and of itself has driven up our liabilities very, very significantly. A year previously in FY20, we were able to, FY19, we were able to use a 3.5% rate. The reason why it changed is because it's heavily influenced by federal monetary policy and what's going on in the bond market. So when the Fed is making changes to interest rates and the market is responding with, how it prices the municipal bond rate, that impacts our liabilities just by way of how we have to do the calculations. So really through no fault of the state, it's just due to the fact that the economy and the economic situation we're in has changed a little bit and rates have come down. That in and of itself is responsible for $488 million of the increase in liabilities on our balance sheet. And you could see how it's broken out, $256 million on VSERS, $232 million on the teachers. Next slide. So This chart, which I pulled from data that the Treasurer's Office provided to the General Assembly, which was great, shows you, similar to a chart I showed on Friday about all the different drivers of the changes in liabilities over time. This shows it for OPEB just from year to year. If you work your way down the chart and just add down, you can see all the differences from the numbers. Our claims history was actually better than we thought it would be. If the rates would have just stayed at 3.5%, the liabilities actually would have ticked down a little bit. However, the discount rate changing, that number at the bottom, the fact that we had to go from 3.5 to 2.2 increased the liabilities overall and counteracted all of the positive actuarial gains that we would have seen from all these other factors. So, these numbers, because we're not pre-funding, are so heavily influenced by federal interest rates. And that really is hurting the state's balance sheet. Next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So this is like the differential between the real dollars, right, and the sort of out there floating in the world dollars. So what's happening with the actual money? Is it invested in a way that it's earning 2.23%, or is it invested in a way that it's earning 7%?
I think it's earning a little more than 2.23% and a little less than 7%. If it's in the trust investment account, it tends to be a little more conservative than VPIC's earnings, but we have to do for GASB reporting standards, we have to create a blended rate that's based on, that's very heavily influenced by the 20-year AA bond rate. Whether we're doing better or worse than that doesn't directly impact that calculation from year to year. I think what impacts that blended rate tends to be more about how big is your asset pool growing over time and how close are you getting toward pre-funding. But the money is not sitting under the mattress anywhere. They're in order to, anybody sort of prudently managing money like this will have it at least in some conservative investments that'll get you some rate of return.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, just looking at the last page you showed and trying to put it in context to the 1.68 billion from the previous slide, it looks like the total liabilities are 2.3 billion for OPEB, and pre-funding would shave off 1.68 billion of those. Is that inaccurate?
It's actually like 2.7, I think, but yeah.
Okay.
1.4 plus 1.2.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I was using the 2019 values. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So it's a massive portion of the total overall accrued OPEB liabilities.
That's correct. Okay. So let's talk about what it would require to pre-fund. Like with pensions, a pre-funded OPEB system is going to require the employer to set aside some calculated amount of money above and beyond the pay-go cost of premiums. Because remember, we need to build up a surplus pool of assets over time that we can invest. So over time, the money will grow bigger and bigger, and you'll eventually get to a point where you have enough assets that you can fund your benefits without running out of assets. Either an ADEC, like the pensions, can be used where there's a amount that's calculated every year, and that reflects both the normal cost, the amount that the active workforce the amount you need to set aside on an ongoing basis every year to pre-fund the benefit that the active workforce earned that year, and an unfunded liability amortization payment, or you can do an alternative funding schedule that you can pursue. And one of the ideas that the treasurer put forth earlier this session was for the teacher OPEB, moving to a system where instead of an ADAC, you're committing yourself to incremental increases of the amount of money you put in. So you would start off with a little bit of money, $20 million or so above the pay-go amount to protect yourself from volatility in the market and get yourself going, and then commit yourself to increases every year until you build up enough money. I think what the specific scenario that was proposed, which I just mentioned as an example, is, for several years, you commit yourself to a 10% increase over what you paid the year before, and then 3% annual increases after that. That could work for some situations in lieu of an ADAC structure, as long as the actuaries cost it out and it passes what they call a crossover analysis, which is a very technical thing that is way beyond my level of expertise. But my point is pre-funding really is really simple when you get down to it. It's about committing yourself to a system where you're putting more money every year than you are paying out in benefits. You're investing that money so it grows over time, and you're doing it in a way that's actuarially sound. So if I was paying $10 a year and I decided to put $10.50 away, it's probably not actuarially sound. We're not putting enough money away. But the point is, in order to pre-fund, we need to try to make sure that we can afford the incremental payments above and beyond what we're paying right now. Pre-funding would have immediate benefits to the state. You do not have to be 100% funded in order to receive these benefits. You would be able to take advantage of the investment returns at 7% through VPIC, which reduces the future cost to the taxpayers. And the fact that you are moving to pre-funding would immediately lower the state's unfunded liabilities by $1.68 billion, because we would be able to discount our liabilities and do our math based on 7% instead of 2.2%. It would also create some predictability in future OPEB costs. Next slide.
Chris, I have a question.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Andrew.
Would using surplus money now have a positive impact on the OPEB?
It is necessary, but not sufficient. I would say that. So putting surplus money in is great. It certainly helps. Absent a statutory funding schedule and funding policy being put into place that commits you to a future series of payments and saying, you know what, this is what we're going to pay from now till 2050, or like with the pensions, we're going to commit to amortize and pay off our unfunded liability in 30 years at this rate. Absent that statutory funding policy, we cannot fully pre-fund. So putting money aside is only half of the equation. You also need to make sure you have that statutory policy and that future commitment to additional money coming in.
But it's an okay starting.
I'd say it's a good start. I'd say it's a good start.
Chris, can I ask sort of a similar question? I think how would like S&P and Moody's look at that, that second bullet point there when they look at the state's total unfunded liabilities? Would they sort of, if we implemented this and 1.6 billion went off of our unfunded balance sheet, would they say, okay, that's an improvement? Or they say, okay, it's sort of this actuarial and accounting method that accounts for this future?
I would say, so without daring to sound like I'm speaking for the rating agencies, I would say they would look favorably generally on us moving toward pre-funding and cutting those liabilities off our balance sheet.
I can provide a very specific answer because I have the S&P Global Ratings report on OPEB. And so what S&P Global Ratings believes is progress in addressing unfunded OPEB liabilities by either pre-funding or modifying benefits could reduce state government credit risk. And you can read the entire report, but it definitely focuses on pre-funding and highlights the importance of reducing credit risk.
Great. And I also, on one of these slides, I pulled out an excerpt from Fitch's latest rating for us, and it reinforces what Representative Gannon said. I mean, we were very fortunate that we maintained our bond rating this last cycle, but the rating agencies did cite and put us on notice that they're paying attention to what happens with our long-term liabilities. And they appreciate that the state seems very serious about developing a plan to address these, and they're looking to see how we follow through with it.
The other thing that the S&P Global thing does is it looks at all the states and the funded ratio, and the median funded ratio is 2.9% and the average is 15.3. So we're sort of at the bottom of the barrel.
Only can go up from there.
It can only go up from there. But I just wanted to point that out.
Leona, did you have a question?
Yeah, so just listening to your presentation about the OPEB. So it says in the, on page 8, a large funding plan was developed in 2014 to pre-fund OPEB by 2038, but that plan was not consistently adhered to.
It was never codified into statute.
Okay.
That's right.
So is that what this is, what we're working on, to get it codified into statute so that it actually be, whatever is decided will be actually followed? Okay. Are we just talking,
Yes, that's part of the charge of the task force, is to decide what to do about the OPEB liability because based on either a pre-funding plan that commits more money to the problem or a change in benefits that makes the price tag smaller, the state is aiming to try to remove this liability from our balance sheet going forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if Vermont began to pre-fund and established, the pre-funding policy into statute and started systematically appropriating additional dollars above and beyond the pay-go amount to build up that pool of assets, and we can use that 7% discount rate, we would see our liabilities reduced by approximately $1.68 billion based on FY20's data. You can see here how those numbers shake out for the different systems. And pre-funding would, as we were just talking about, respond to some concerns raised by the rating agencies. And that's just a quote from Fitch's latest rating that I found online, where they are paying attention to how do we manage our long-term liability burden in the context of everything else going on. So, they take a look at what are our economic growth forecasts looking to be in the future? What are our demographics? What's happening outside this room in the broader economy? And, if we have a state that's not projected to grow quite as rapidly as some other states are, that creates pressure on us. So, some of our demographic and economic forecasts don't necessarily work in the state's favor for resolving some of these issues. So that heightens the importance of being proactive and trying to make sure we're addressing these, because we don't have the ability to grow our way out of the problem the way a state that is having massive population or economic growth forecasts may be able to. If you take a look here, though, we're looking at 3.1.
Question.
So does that mean state demographics impact bond ratings,
Yes.
not just liability?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So these are just the numbers here that show you, we would cut that liability by more than 50% if we were to use the different discount rate if we were pre-funding. Next slide. So here are some potential paths forward, and just to give you sort of the lay of the land of where things stood as of the end of FY20. The teacher fund, the Retired Teacher Health and Medical Benefits Fund, had a pretty small fund balance, $8.7 million. And that was largely from an increase in the employee group waiver plan reimbursements recognized during FY20. The timing of those reimbursements can vary from year to year. But that amounts, $8.7 million, certainly nothing to sneeze at, but that is insufficient to pursue a pre-funding strategy alone on. You need to have that, statutory commitment into place and a commitment to a systematic increase of appropriations every year to build up that pool of assets. The state plan had a balance of $57.6 million at the end of FY20. So it's a little bit more. It could help jumpstart pre-funding, but again, it's not sufficient in and of itself to be able to point to and say we're pre-funding. That money will likely increase by the end of FY21 or after FY21 and the books are closed due to the fact that there's going to be some unreserved general fund surplus that will be able to go over there based on statute. But the numbers are still being crunched and the ink is still wet on the books of FY21. So we don't know exactly yet what that number will look like. So as I mentioned, if we are going to pre-fund, and I'm sure I've convinced all of you why it's such a great idea to pre-fund, it's easier said than done. As Representative Copeland-Hans has said, it would require us to figure out how we pay for this. We can sit around and think through funding policies and what do the numbers look like from now for the next 30 years. But at the end of the day, it's going to require some additional money to be appropriated above and beyond. Back of the envelope, you're looking at probably in the ballpark of $20 million above the pay-go amount from year to year per plan. Might be more, might be less, but it depends on the ADAC, if you go with an ADAC schedule and what that amortization period looks like, or if you went with an alternative proposal with 10% and 3% annual increases. When you look at how those are modeled out and projected, generally you're looking at increases above the pay-go of roughly $20 million a year, give or take a few $1 million from year to year. Because again, your claims history can change from year to year. The timing of when EGWIP reimbursements are recognized can change from year to year. So and healthcare cost trends are kind of notoriously unpredictable compared to pension cost trends. Healthcare costs are projected to grow at a steep rate, but shorter term projections are a little different from longer term. It's harder to project on a longer term. And this is also an area where federal healthcare policy, as I mentioned, specifically around Medicare, can have a great deal of influence on what long-term healthcare costs could be. But, you know, in order to fully say we're pre-funding, we need to have both of those elements. We need to have the pre-funding schedule, and we need to commit to above and beyond appropriations. And one of the charges of this group is to figure out what that would look like and whether there are opportunities on the pension side to offset some costs or free up some resources that help us get on a track to pre-funding. So, you know.
Chris, it sounds like the above pay-go amount that we're talking about ratcheting up 10% a year for, I think the plan was 3 years and then 3% a year beyond that. That's all general fund. We're not going to be able to charge federal funding sources or other funding sources for that above pay-go amount. Is that?
I don't know the answer to that question right now.
Okay.
We can look it up though. Whether or not the general fund is our most flexible pot of money.
Right.
But you know, I think it is an open question of where that money actually comes from and what proportion of it is assessed to whom. You know, whether some of it is assessed to local education, you know, agencies, whether some of it is assessed to members, whether it's assessed to different funds, whether, you know, if you were to do on the teacher side to do an 8X type schedule, you know, you could conceivably, and this was a topic of conversation in the last session, you could conceivably charge the normal cost to one fund and charge the unfunded liability payment to a different fund. So I think all of those questions sort of, and that would mirror the pension arrangement. I think all of those questions kind of need to be ironed out.
Thank you.
So in addition to figuring out how we pay for all of this and by what terms we would pay it by, you know, obviously the state should always consider, you know, additional opportunities to contain costs. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I would feel remiss to not add that there, particularly if the federal landscape changes and provides additional opportunities for interaction with Medicare and savings. You would also likely, as we mentioned, see some savings on the OPEB side if any of the benefit provisions on the pension side are changed to reduce the number of people who are retired before they're eligible for Medicare. So those are all types of those are all considerations that go into the mix that could lower future healthcare costs. Next slide. So that's my high level overview as we start dipping our toes into the waters of this very complicated topic. Really, when you get down to it, you know, if I could distill this into just a couple key takeaways, it's that, you know, this is a very significant liability on our balance sheet because we're not pre-funding. It is very efficient to pre-fund, and we should try to get in a position where we are pre-funding because every dollar you earn in the investment market to pay these future benefits is a dollar that does not have to come out of the taxpayer's pocket or out of the operating budget that year. And in order to say we're pre-funding and lower those liabilities by more than 50% on our balance sheet, we need to do two things. We need to develop a statutory funding schedule that lays out the terms of how we're going to resolve these unfunded liabilities and how we're going to build up a pool of assets. And we need to commit to it in the future through years of incrementally higher appropriations over what we're currently paying. So I'm happy to answer any other questions at this point. And we will make sure that you have the GASB reports uploaded up to the website because just like with the pension valuation studies, they really do contain a wealth of information about the different assumptions that are being used for calculating these things, some key member characteristics, and, you know, data about the cost share. And you can really see how things have changed from year to year by using different discount rates and how being able to use that 7% rate really, really changes the numbers compared to where we are right now. It's just really good, useful information to have. And, you know, I mean, I'm a nerd. I love reading these things. And I think that our actuary that we have really does a nice job of distilling very complicated topics into a format that is pretty easily digestible, all things considered. Yes, sir.
So if we, you know, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, part of our task is considering all options on the table, including alternative revenue streams. So exploring a new revenue stream to pre-fund, that's something that would help address this issue, correct?
I would say regardless of where the money comes from, being able to have more money going into the system above and beyond the pay-go amount to build up that cushion and that head of steam that through investment returns would be a beneficial thing.
And so immediately putting in its statute a dedicated revenue stream or wherever the money comes from, we can start to apply those benefits. What was it, 1.6 billion reduction in liabilities? Just that alone?
And you need to codify the funding policy into statute and adhere to it.
How do you ensure that?
Well,
I'm not going to answer that.
Done a good job on the pension system. I mean, for over a decade now of fully funding the ADAC, actually funding above the ADAC. So, I mean, we've been committed to that for some time now. I think the challenge will be continuing to do that and then pre-funding OPEB and taking on that additional liability.
Right, because the worry that we have is that on the horizon after the COVID stimulus money dries up, you know, the big unknown is what happens to the Vermont economy and whether we start to feel budget crunches that look like they're going to bite into essential functions of state government.
Chris, I guess I have a two-part question here. Do the rating agencies look at the liabilities from OPEB and pensions differently? And the reason why I ask is obviously we have we might be, hopefully we can increase the pie with some additional revenue, but you know, the pie is finite, and I'm just kind of wondering about the cost benefit analysis. If we have extra money putting it to OPEB versus the pensions, I mean, clearly there's the accounting benefit with OPEB that would be significant. But just wondering about the cost benefit analysis, where you put additional money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I don't think there's a clear answer to it. And again, I wouldn't want to speak for the rating agencies. I think the treasurer's office would probably be better positioned to speak to this. You know, the rating agencies will take a look at what your liabilities are, you know, on your balance sheet in the context of sort of a per capita type calculation. You know, how much does it total per person, among many other things. So in that formula and that model, this hurts us. But, you know, they also take a look at, you know, what are the size of your sort of long-term fixed costs on your budget and your long-term financial commitments? And what is your ability as a state to sort of respond to unforeseen things? So one of the things when I was at the city of Philadelphia, we always got dinged for was our really, really high pension liabilities and our really, really high fixed costs, because we didn't have much of an ability to navigate during revenue downturns. So, you know, I think anything you can do, though, to put yourself on a track to pre-funding certainly is beneficial and it's tax efficient. And I also think the rating agencies realize that this is not, you know, we're not a huge outlier among other states. You know, most states out there are minimally pre-funding OPEB, if they're pre-funding at all. You know, if everybody was getting completely dinged on the fact that they're not pre-funding and that was the only thing, nobody would have a favorable bond rating. So, you know, I think it's one of many considerations that go into it. But, you know, they do want to see the long-term liabilities per capita come down. They also recognize that a lot of this is influenced by federal policy, you know, interest rates and things like that. But, you know, I think they want to see your long-term liabilities per capita come down. They want to make sure you have a sustainable plan for funding them in the future. And that it's a plan that is not going to jeopardize all the other things government needs to do every day.
Chris, on slide 5, you talked about how Easter's is different from Easter's and the fact that you don't get spousal until 25 plus years. Does that mean that spousal is included in the VSERS group?
Yes.
All the way along?
So you said that more states are starting to look at pre-funding, that they previously did pay-go. What did some of the other states do to address the funding for that?
That's a great question. I have not had a chance to explore that topic. You know, I'm not aware of how many states I'm not aware of how many states have done a dedicated revenue stream. I think a lot of this is on sort of it's added to the budget along with other sort of fixed employment costs, however those are funded. I think there are some jurisdictions out there that have explored a very, very risky strategy of trying to pre-fund with borrowed money, similar to an obligation bond. That's definitely worth its own separate discussion. It is an incredibly risky strategy, but I don't think there's a whole lot of states out there that are, 100% pre-funded or anywhere close to it. I think a lot of places are really sort of in the earliest, the places that are committing to this are still in their relatively early years of doing so.
Other questions?
Maybe. Here's a credit list.
So I don't know if, we were actually hoping that HR would have been able to join us today with more into the weeds information on this, but they were unable to, so they will at another date. So Michael, did you have more into the weeds information for us, or just questions, or how?
What I can offer is, thank you, Chris, for that overview. That was very good. And as Chris acknowledged during the presentation, the Treasurer Pierce, has over the last several years made numerous suggestions and is a very strong proponent for pre-funding as a fiduciary, not only to the beneficiaries of the system, but to the taxpayers of the state of Vermont. She feels that this is the way to go, and in the long term will actually save money for the taxpayers. And in addition to reducing the overall liabilities to the state and therefore impacting the bond rating as well, there's a lot of pluses to doing that. Notwithstanding, as was discussed, there has to be a way to come up with the additional money that's needed to begin the pre-funding process. Although, just from a numbers perspective, when you look at what was suggested last year and this past fiscal year as well, budgetary year, in terms of the additional money that was needed between the two systems to help initiate the pre-funding was in the tune of around $40 million, which sort of pales in comparison to the funding that's needed on the pension side. So I think from a cost benefit perspective, there's less money that's needed on the pre-funding, which will actually get you a larger bang for the buck in terms of reducing overall liabilities on the OPEB compared to the liabilities of the pension. The challenge, as was noted, is trying to figure out how to come up with that additional money, as well as the incremental increase for 10% over the 3-year period, and then additional 3% on top of that in out years from a growth perspective. That's going to come at the expense of not funding something else, unless there's a way to come up with a dedicated revenue source, as was suggested also. So we can certainly provide more information if you'd like to schedule some time with both HR of the Treasurer's Office, include the Treasurer herself, to come in and provide much more detailed or in the weeds information. Certainly do that.
Did you have a question?
No, I did not.
When you said, that, I don't remember your exact words, but you said, unless we can come up with a dedicated revenue source. But even coming up with a designated revenue source that is devoted to this means there's less revenue for something else. I mean, it isn't as if there's an unlimited amount of money out there that we can. So if we came up with a designated revenue source for this, then there is no revenue source for something else. So it's all.
I wasn't suggesting a dedicated revenue source. It was merely commenting on the comment that was made by the other member of the committee.
Right. No, I knew you weren't suggesting it necessarily, but whatever revenue we come up with for this means there's less revenue for something else. That's
correct.
Yeah. And therein lies the rub. We have to decide where the revenue is going to be put and how we're going to get that revenue. As you well know. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to Leona's comment earlier, or question on page 8, the larger funding plan from 2014. Is that available for the committee to review just in our work here? I mean, I'm thinking, obviously there were discussions at the legislature last year about what a pre-funding plan might look like. Maybe that's the better place to start, but I'm just kind of wondering what that plan looked like.
So that's a great question and a great transition to what I was going to suggest we spend some time doing next, which is to sort of catalog where we need more information, where we would like to have more, either more data or in this case, a little more detail on who developed the plan, where the plan resides, and can we look at it? So other folks have questions that occurred to them as we were going through this presentation.
Well, I think one thing that'd be nice to know is, I know the treasurer's office has taken a lot of steps to reduce healthcare costs. Understanding exactly what those steps are and whether there are other steps that we can take would be important to take a look at, because I mean, reducing those costs, reduces the amount we would have to pre-fund. So I know the treasurer's office has done a lot of work on that, but it would be great to understand if there's other steps that we can take that we haven't considered yet. And I will say one of the things, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but the largest cost for OPEB is under age 65, right? I mean, so I mean, one option, this sort of crosses over into pensions, is increasing the retirement age does reduce the OPEB liability.
Molly?
Or I would add to that, I don't know, did I come to the same conclusion as you? I had the same thing starred in my notes, if fewer people retire early, you save on OPEB, but it makes me wonder about incentivizing a longer stay, if that's a verb, incentivizing. My mother would probably roll in her grave, but, making it an incentive rather than a requirement, because I think there are implications from the human perspective on the requirement. But it does seem that the longer people work, that stuck out to me as well.
Yeah.
It's something to research.
And it's more likely that you can incentivize on the pension side than you can on the side.
Right. And the reality is, if we need to understand what the domino impacts might be of incentivizing longer employment, because that probably increases somebody's average final compensation. Mm-hmm. B, it impacts local school district budgets when you have more veteran teachers at a higher salary range. So, these aren't necessarily all things that we could recommend and impact, nor are they all decisions that the legislature could put into statute. But they're impacts that we should probably understand as we ponder how to make changes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, if you project out what might those numbers be with people retiring at 62, 63, 64, 65, that's an isolated set of data. And you're pointing out it's not in isolation. How does that affect a local tax base then?
Right. And a local school district may really want to incentivize, the higher salary teachers to retire. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that we can.
And we did find that when we did it before, when we had a buyout, that it had repercussions that lasted for a long time. So it isn't that isn't just a simple matter of buying people out. Yeah.
And I think exploring all those social issues is really important. Thinking about, if you move the retirement age to 65 and you tell somebody fresh out of college, you're going to be in the workforce for 44 years, how that kind of impacts recruitment of new people into different professions too. So exploring all those things, I think, would be a good conversation to have.
So I won't even Jeff one of my solutions for healthcare, but I won't go there right now because their hair will go on fire. Yes.
For the record again, Jeff Fannin from Vermont NEA. We did, during the course of the conversation about the passage of this bill, talk about healthcare. We know it's part of the solution. And we know that healthcare is an enormous part of retirement as well as the state's overall budget. And we think that, for 20 plus years, Vermont NEA has been trying to look at creative, better ways to provide Vermonters with health insurance and healthcare. So we stand ready.
I know.
To work with you.
Yes, and there are ways of delivering healthcare that are important that we have to look at and what we pay for in healthcare. But I had a bill a couple of years ago that would have put all publicly funded people into the same healthcare plan. All publicly funded people. Teachers, municipal employees, state employees, UVM, state college system, anybody who's publicly funded to kickstart a single payer system in Vermont. But it didn't go anywhere then, but who knows? Anyway, that's a different question. And even if you had that, you have to look at what the benefits are and how you're paying for it. So, yeah.
Eric's poised.
I'm just thinking, I hadn't really thought about, this isn't state employees centric, but I'm thinking about the incentives to incentivize a higher salary teacher to retire. Does the school district then bear some of the OPEB costs, increased OPEB costs, or does that fall elsewhere? Because I would think that would affect the calculus of whether that is something that should be incentivized or not.
That's a good question. And I don't know.
We will find out.
We need to ask that. So other ponderings that people would like to flag for us to come back to.
And we will have all of the plans so that we can actually look at those with the benefit schedules and when you have to retire and what the incentives are to not retire or to retire. So we will have all of those.
I had another question that I was thinking of during your presentation. If we have pre-funded OPEB and then federal waters, change and there becomes something more akin to a single payer healthcare, what would happen with that? Is that determined by the statute and how it's written?
That's a really good question. I think ultimately the legislature would likely have to change the funding statute, but right now the trust funds are set up in a way where that money is to be used for providing healthcare. So there's still likely going to be some cost associated with some of these benefits. It could just be a matter of if you see if the federal landscape changed and all of a sudden your future costs are going to go way down from what you initially thought it would be, you're likely just going to have to put way less money aside on an ongoing basis because all of your actuarial projections will change. But the money that is set aside under the current law cannot be diverted for anything else.
That be a happy thing to have to figure out.
Problem to have.
Yes. Other questions that folks have, other information that you would like to have in order to more fully understand the OPEB challenge? Because we are going to need to have HR and the treasurer's office collaborate to bring us sort of the next round or the next deeper dive into the weeds. So would like to know what other information people need. I'm going to ask a question then, since nobody else is jumping in. Michael, I'm wondering if it's possible for you and HR to get us demographic information to compare the what the per household benefit is for folks who have established a spousal benefit versus those who have not. It has always occurred to me that there's the challenge of needing to be a 25-year teacher in order to have earned a spousal benefit is maybe a vestige of times gone by when we didn't give teachers the same benefit that we give to state employees. And I'd like to understand, what types of households that impacts and what the value of those benefits are to single retiree versus spousal benefit.
Okay.
I mean, understanding and acknowledging that healthcare is not a luxury item. Everybody in Vermont is having to figure out how to get their Medicare wraparound policy in retirement. So, we have to understand that the people who aren't getting a spousal benefit are seeing an impact on their household's bottom line. And I'd like to understand what types of families that impacts.
Right, we can do that. So most of the information will come from the teacher system because the state system, as was acknowledged, has the spousal coverage. I can also provide information about the number of retirees that we have where their pension payment doesn't even fully cover their health insurance premium deduction. So they are in what's called a prepay where they have to pay us every 6 months. Because we take their entire pension check to put toward their health insurance benefit, and then we have certain people have to pay on top of that. So we have a system in place for that. We can provide some demographic and some counts on that type of information.
There are a lot of people in that position.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's a surprising number of people.
Are they people who retired quite some time ago, or?
It's different. Everyone's situation is different.
Mm-hmm.
Depends whether they have dependents or not as well. Your point about no spousal coverage.
One of the things I'd like to see, and it would be a little down the road, we right now, as a state, will purchase for Medicare eligibles, we'll purchase Medicare for them to get them duals, we call them duals. They receive both Medicaid and Medicare. And it helps us to, by actually paying their Medicare policy, it helps to reduce the cost. We don't pay as much in Medicaid costs because we've got them on Medicare. What would happen with the Medicare Advantage plans? I don't know if we have at all looked at that for retirees to actually assist with costs that way.
We actually have, and I'm not at liberty to discuss that at this moment, but I will be in the month of August.
Okay.
Adding some suspense.
Not that I want to hear Joe Namath come in and pitch us, but
I can, just to clarify, I can speak to what we're doing around the subject of Medicare Advantage, principally on the VSTRS or teacher system. But I'll have to look. I'm not sure we have any situation where there's a dual Medicaid, Medicare with any of our retirees, but I can certainly ask that question.
Creative thinking on how to save dollars in healthcare is welcome. So do come back with other ideas or information or questions that you'd like answered.
So this is not related to OPEB necessarily, but Andrew asked the question about demographics, statewide demographics. Is there any value in us also seeing what kind of retirement plans Vermonters who aren't either retired teachers or retired state employees have? Because I know that there are a lot of people out there without a retirement, without a pension plan. And would that be helpful at all for, including me? My pension plan is Social Security. That's it. So, I don't know if it would be helpful to go along with the demographics that you asked for us to see what those other Vermonters have or don't have.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be very valuable. And I think when we were working with the treasurer to start standing up the Green Mountain Secure
Yeah.
Retirement Program, we looked at that data. I think ARP
Yeah.
had done a lot of work on that.
I agree. Very helpful. Haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think we could get it from them. It's probably changed a little bit, but,
Yeah.
and the treasurer's office probably has a lot of that information too because of the what is it called? Green Mountain
Secure Retirement.
Secure Retirement.
We're hopefully going to launch later this year, calendar year.
What is that?
It's a plan that'll be available to employers with fewer than 50 employees where the employer currently does not have a retirement plan offering for their employees. And it will be, it's managed, we have a contract in place with a vendor now. And we'll be rolling it out later this year for employers to sign up for. And the employees be able to make contributions, payroll deduction contributions to a 401k type plan. And the idea is that by having a pool of employers and employees, fees associated with those plans will be lower than what they potentially would get out on the open market if each employer were to go out on their own and seek something. So we're actively working on finalizing all the work that needs to go into developing the system and having it available to employers to begin signing up their employees.
So it's not defined benefit?
No, it's like a defined contribution. It's a 401k type retirement plan. It's going to be mandatory. When an employer signs up, it's going to be mandatory that all the employees have to sign up, but they have the option to opt out if they elect to.
Any other information people are interested in flagging for future conversations?
I was looking at the list that we had last time. We talk about having a personal investor, somebody come in and just talk to us about how that works. We can probably do that at the same time we're looking at other demographics. And how we compare it to the surrounding states. The benefit plans that we have and the cost and everything. And then we'll talk a lot about like one-time contributions and revenue sources. So I have those on. Okay.
So I think that was it for what we had on our agenda for OPEB this morning, but I wonder if we want to talk about updating the group in terms of where we are on the RFP process.
I think so, and I'm going to look in your eyes and say, you would like us to take a little break?
That is correct.
Before we go there.
That is correct. So we will, what do you think, 15 minutes?
Sure.
Feel free to go outside, get some fresh air if you want to, use the
Take us off live.
facilities, take us off live.
offline.
Yeah.